Okay, Jim, how about another military hero, Jonathan?
Yes. Jonathan, the son of King Saul. Saul was a great soldier, and the Philistines feared him, but Saul fought for Saul. He was selfish and greedy, and even though he talked like a man of God, his heart was not really with God. But his son Jonathan was a genuine man. He was also a great soldier, and the Philistines feared Jonathan. And when they saw Jonathan and Saul fighting side by side, the only difference they could see is Saul's older. They were both enemies to Philistines. But Saul fought for Saul. Jonathan fought for the Lord himself. And so, at one time, Jonathan and Saul, and they had a small army of about, I think if I remember right, it was 600 men, or maybe 400. And they were camped down below two hills. Up on top of the hills or cliffs were Philistine soldiers, a detachment of them. And being on the high ground, they had all the advantage of height over any enemy. Saul and Jonathan and his small army were camped on trees down below those hills. And they only had two swords because the Philistines did not allow the Israelis to have blacksmiths, so they couldn't make weapons. And they made the charge for Philistine blacksmiths to sharpen tools for the Israeli farmers so expensive, for example, to sharpen the plowshare on a plow, the price you could buy a ram for what that sharpening would cost. So it was not only very expensive, but it kept the Israelis from making weapons. So Saul and Jonathan in the army had only two swords among 600 soldiers. Saul had a sword, Jonathan had a sword. Now Jonathan, being the son of the king, had an armor bearer that was a servant for him, and the armor bearer carried his sword and his weapons for him. Well, Saul was frustrated. He wanted to fight the Philistines, but he had no weapons, and he just didn't know what to do. Saul was a soldier. He liked war, but he was unable to fight, and he was frustrated. And he put out an order. He was so angry at his position that he told his soldiers, "No one eats anything until I get vengeance on my enemies." Well, before he made that stupid proclamation, Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Let's go out from under these trees and make ourselves openly public available to those Philistines. Let's show ourselves to them. And we'll present ourselves to them before God. And if the Philistines say, 'Come up here,' then that'll be a signal that God has given them into our hands. If they say, 'Go back,' then we'll just go back to the camp." So the armor bearer said, "Whatever you say, I'm with you heart and soul." Remember, the armor bearer was carrying the sword and the shield and whatever other weapon. So they walked out from underneath the trees and made themselves visible to the Philistines. Philistines looked down and saw them, and they made a very insulting remark. They said, "The Israelites are crawling out of their holes," like they were some kind of rats or something. So they said, "Come up here and we'll teach you a lesson." Now, Jonathan said to his armor bearer, that was the signal. God has given them into our hands. And so they began climbing the cliffs. Made it very clear that it was extremely steep cliffs. They climbed using both their hands and their feet, meaning the only thing they could do is just get up there. They had no ways to use their weapons. The armor bearer was carrying the weapon, probably on his belt, maybe hanging on his back. So they climbed up the cliffs. The Philistines were up above them, could be easily raining rocks or spears or whatever they wanted down on them. And Jonathan and his armor bearer would be helpless to do anything to defend. But somehow they made it to the top. And when they came over the top of the cliff, they began walking toward the Philistines. And as Jonathan ahead saw a Philistine coming toward him, the Philistine suddenly just fell down in front of him. And Jonathan stepped over the Philistine without touching him. The armor bearer behind him killed the Philistine. The next Philistine came, and the same thing. He fell down. Jonathan stepped over him. The armor-bearer killed him. Before long, they had killed 20 Philistines. And by then, the Philistines were thrown into a panic by the Spirit of God. And they began running around and killing each other. And weapons were falling all over the place. Saul, in the meantime, had been down at the camp trying to get some information from God from the priest. The priest, Phinehas' name means out of the mouth of a serpent. Not a very good sounding priest. But Saul had asked him to inquire of God about what to do. And when he heard the shouting and the yelling up above the hills of the Philistines screaming in panic, he knew what war sounds like. He told the priest, "Never mind, I'll talk to you later." And he got the army and they ran up the hill. And now there were weapons lying all over the place. So everybody was able to get a weapon. And they began chasing the Philistines and drove them clear out of the country. Then when they came back down finally, and everybody had been running around killing Philistines all day, they finally got through and they came back down to the camp. And Jonathan came down and he was worn out because he had climbed the cliffs and fought against the Philistines. And now he was tired and he was hungry. He did not know about the order that Saul had said, "Nobody eats until I get vengeance." And as they came down into camp, they saw honey lying on the ground from wild bees. And Jonathan, with his spear, touched a little bit of honey on the end of it, sucked it off the end of his spear, and his eyes brightened up. He felt better. And he was ready to celebrate the victory, but some soldiers said, "You're in trouble." And he said, "Why?" "Because your father gave an order, nobody takes anything till I get vengeance, and you violate that order." And somehow it got known to Saul. And Saul had a lottery drawing to determine who was it that ate some food. And of course, all Jonathan had done was take a little bit of honey. And Saul said, "Be it ever so severely what God does to me if today Jonathan does not die." And he ordered the soldiers to kill Jonathan. But the soldiers refused. They said, "Jonathan's not going to die today." Well, Saul just went back home and pouted because Saul didn't get his way. But Jonathan was a great soldier. And I'm sure he would have loved to get away from Saul and be away from him. But Jonathan is a picture of our new nature that's been born again in the Lord. Saul, the picture of the old nature. And the only way Jonathan could ever get away from Saul was by the end of his life. Both of them died the same day fighting against the Philistines. But Jonathan died for the glory of the Lord. Saul died in his own greed and selfishness. Sad thing. Picture of our own old and new natures.